75 to 80. They say you only need 25, but to make sure you get enough, eat the extra. I got a sneaking suspicion someone else got into their programming there. Where's that extra protein going to go? They never tell you. But it turns to uric acid. And again, to keep your blood from going to acid, so your kidneys have to maintain the balance of sodium, potassium, acid, alkaline, salts, sugars in your blood. And your blood has to stay within very narrow specifications. So to keep it that way, the body, the kidneys have that responsibility. If the body gets too much protein coming in, which cannot be broken down into amino acids, they turn to uric acid. To keep the blood from going acid, it has to take extra water out of the bodies where it's stored or where it's at and dilute that acid and eliminate it through the bladder. Now what if it doesn't, we don't give the body enough water to neutralize or get it out? Then it's going to pull water from your tissues and dehydrate you. And that's why people lose weight on high protein diets. They're dehydrating themselves. All right? And that's not what we want to do. Because you're not getting rid of the protein, see, and you're not getting rid of the salts that is hanging onto that water in the tissues. All you're doing is squeezing out the water. All right? And making the protein and the salts go into the tissues. And when you make them go into the tissues, then as soon as you give them some water, they're going to suck it right back into those tissues. And they also, when the salt that likes water, especially sodium likes water, pulls it into those tissues. It doesn't let potassium get in there because that water and potassium don't like each other. All right? So just taking potassium is not going to get rid of that salt water in your tissues. You've got to find another way to get rid of that salt water and then get the potassium back in there to help with that overweight problem. So high protein, any emphasis, whether it's in pill form, powdered form, or just eating lots of meat. You should only eat meat between 12 and 2. Meat is your most acid of all the proteins. Everything that comes from a seed, S-E-E-D, has protein in it. So even your fruits have protein in it. So everything that you eat that's food has protein in it. And so you don't have to eat just meat in order to get enough protein. And you don't have to eat meat to get the complete protein. That's all fabrication and voodoo at best. All right? They lived without meat the first few thousand years before the flood. So I think if they did and they lived a pretty good long time, I think we could probably do without. Unless we're starving, you know, if we're no food, no other food. Like in the flood, they didn't have, I mean, you're going to run out of animals if you ate if they ate all the animals up before they got through the flood, you know. But they used up their veggies. They didn't have much vegetation after the flood. So normally they'd be allowed to eat the meat. But that wasn't the main lifestyle or the ideal lifestyle. It was an emergency measure. Because when you look at the construction of our body, it's not made to eat meat. The colon system, the elimination system, digestive system is just not made for doing a lot of meat eating. And our teeth aren't made with, you know, if they were made with pointed teeth, like meat-eater animals do have, saber tooth, so they can tear into the meat. But see, we don't have teeth like that, right? So you look at the whole construction of this body. It's not made to eat meat. Now, I'm not going to make it a sin if you eat meat. You know? There's our Father has permissive will, and He's got His ideal will. So I'll leave it at that. But our acceptance is not based on performance anyways. So eating meat or not eating meat, as Paul talks about in Romans, has nothing to do with you being a part of His family. There's a sacrifice involved in that. Even in the Old Covenant, it was a sacrifice that made us acceptable with the Father. So the Son is His Son is our acceptance with the Father under the New Covenant. So eating meat or not eating meat is not the issue here. Well, we want to look at what is the best lifestyle of eating that keeps us from gaining weight or losing too much weight. Right? And liquids too, for that matter. For a lot of liquids we eat can put on weight and some can lower weight, see. But protein, meat protein is the hardest to digest, and you're going to not be able to get the amino acids out of your meat through digestion when you eat it after 2. Because it takes twice as long to digest it, and you're going to be working on it all night. So that's one thing. And children shouldn't eat meat until they're 12. Because their digestive juices are not strong enough to dissolve that meat so that they can be made, processed as amino acids. So again, they're not without protein because they just eat fruits, they'll get protein, or vegetables. So see, it's just man's idea and not trusting his creator that comes up with all these other wacko ideas that you got to eat meat in order to get enough protein, and complete protein, supposedly. I always mention to people, well, if you need eat meat to get your protein, and what does the cow eat? That gives him all his protein. Does the cow eat meat? I've never seen one eat a slab of meat. A gorilla don't eat meat, and they got some pretty good muscle. Where do they get their protein? You see? It's just, people don't think sometimes, do we? We don't look at the obvious and learn from nature. That's why the scriptures say that which is natural is first, then that which is spiritual. Because we have problems understanding spiritual if we don't see the natural and understand it. Because that which is unseen is unseen. But everything that our Creator has done in His creation has a spiritual, unseen things going on behind it, you know? So we can learn a lot about the unseen by learning how He's set up the seen and understanding it. So that's kind of why I use always these illustrations of the body and how it operates to get you to understand some of those things. Okay. So when we get to talking then about the cause of these weight problems, these are the things we got to zero in on. The water, liquids, and the foods. And we have to say, now, is this food, what is it going to do as far as contribute to the water distribution in my body? Some foods can make you gain more water or give you more water than other foods. Did you realize what percentage of water would you say is in cabbage? It's about 97% water. How much do you think is in a tomato? If you squeezed all the water out like a dehydrator, how much would be left? Just a little skinny stuff. Not much at all. See, some foods have more water in them than other foods, right? Now, what makes some foods have more water than others? It's the sodium content. So if you want to know what foods have more water in them, or more sodium in it, and you're not trying to avoid sodium, you'd want to go with foods that have less sodium. What do you think about a watermelon? You put a lot of water out of a watermelon. It likes sodium. Now some have a balance of potassium and sodium in the foods. So if you knew what foods had in them, you could then regulate your diet a little bit as far as what foods you eat, right? So a lot of foods like kiwi fruit is high in potassium, has some sodium, so it's fruity. Avocado has more potassium than sodium, unless it's the big avocados. Then they're watery, and so they have more sodium in it. So in all your foods, but see, most all of your foods have high water contents, naturally. But what happens when you cook them? And you put it in an oven that's over 120 degrees, like 250 and 300 or 400. What happens to the water that's in the food? Takes it out, doesn't it? What do you got to do then when you eat those foods in order for your body to handle them? You have to take water out of your body and put it in there, because you can't digest your digestive juices. Your saliva alone puts out tremendous amounts of water to have saliva. Do you ever feel like you can't hardly, you don't have enough saliva to hardly chew anything? That saliva requires a lot of water, and so does your digestive juices that come in and mix with your foods. And then bile coming from your liver and gallbladder have tremendous amounts, use tremendous amounts of water. So you want to get my tape on foods. That goes into that more detail, because we haven't got time to cover that whole process. But you need water for those processes. And if you eat foods that have been cooked, it's hard to eat meat not cooked, right? So meat goes in there dry. Basically, that's all you're doing when you're cooking meat, is getting the water out of it, because too much water in meat interferes with digestion. So you cook all that water out of there unless you eat it raw, and you get a few other types of protein. Parasital types of protein. Then your body has to take extra water out in order to mix with it to dilute that acid. And so, of course, you lose water weight when you do that. And again, that's why meat helps you lose more water weight. And people that are heavy meat eaters all their life, they're the ones that are underweight. And some people, they look just right. Their weight distribution looks just right. But they're eating a lot of protein in order to keep it that way. So when you get them off of that stimulation, then their body decides to catch up and get rid of all that excess acid water, and they go underweight. They're really underweight, but it's that salt and that protein that's pushing them out and building up the pressure that makes them feel like they're full. Just like the weightlifter eats a lot of protein to gain mass. Okay? The weightlifter is gaining weight, but all he's doing is putting protein and water in his tissues, and he's bulging. So the only way that weightlifter is gaining weight is he's putting stuffing into different places. Of course, when he eats that cow or protein, he's pushing it in whatever he exercises. If he makes muscles like this and weights like this, he's pushing that cow into his biceps here. Get a little extra cow in there, and then of course you see their blood vessels bulging like crazy. It kind of looks kind of terrible to me. To see all those blood vessels just out there, sticking out further than the muscle even. See, so they're building up pressure in there. It's got to cause a buildup of pressure. But see, they're gaining weight, but it's stuffing. So a lot of people that are underweight, I got to put on some weight, and they just eat all this stuff to try to, and if they exercise, they can, the real skinny you seen in the paper, the real skinny guy, this guy's always looking Sears or somewhere in his magazine, how to get big muscles and put on weight, we look at that kind of stuff, And of course, what we don't realize is the weight you're putting on, is it healthy? Is it your tissue? Or are you just storing some extra cow somewhere in there? Or chicken? Or pork? Mr. Pig? Okay? And that's basically all they're doing. So some people use protein to lose weight, but if you eat a lot of protein and exercise, you'll gain hard weight. So if you don't exercise, you could have high protein and lose water weight. If you eat high proteins and then don't exercise, you don't eat high amounts of protein and you don't exercise, then you get flabby weight. So you take your choice. But see, we got to stop manipulating our body and cooperate about it. When we're having a weight problem, then there's a cause behind it. There's a lifestyle problem here that we need to deal with and zero in on. There's a lifestyle problem. So one of the things that make a person eats lots of protein tends to stay underweight, especially during their childhood if they do that. And a person that tends to eat a lot of salt during their childhood, they condition their body to tend to be water retention type cells. And if you have them both, then your weight sometimes stays distributed pretty evenly until you go one way or the other as you become an adult. Instead of growing any taller when we're adult, like 21 or 20, we tend to grow this way. Some people do. All right? And so what we got to do is give our body, that means our body's missing something. It's a water problem. Now, that don't mean you don't have you're not oily some places. Because you could be having some stored oil in certain places, okay? But that's not your weight. People go and measure this weight. A lot of times that's just gas that's bloating you, but oil don't weigh anything to speak of compared to water. All right? So we're talking about water in your oil will definitely weigh, but it's the water in there that's weighing that, okay? Not that we should eat a lot of fat. There's a lot of problems that come from eating too much fat and too much oil, the wrong kind. That is a problem. So I'm not making little of that, but I'm just saying that's not what we need to focus on when we're dealing with weight problems. The obstructions that we're having is salt water if we're overweight. The obstructions we're having if we're underweight is mostly too much protein weight or too much protein obstruction. All right? That's a general picture. Now, some people are underweight and they stay underweight because of stress. Because stress and anger, what's in the form of anger, worry, or whatever, it keeps them so tight that their body can't pick up enough water. So people that are high protein eaters and stressful, they'll tend to be overweight, and it's very difficult to get them to the place where they can get on that weight or put on that weight. I have to keep talking about underweight people about relaxing those muscles. Deep breathe, stretch those tissues, get them more elastic. Don't let your body get tight. If you don't learn how to pace yourself and deal with that tightness, then your body stays so restricted that your blood vessels and all of those capillaries are so tight, there's very little room that you can squeeze the blood through. And so the body has to keep the water can't get enough water in the blood to carry and the circulation or keep the circulation going good. And so they stay underweight no matter what you do. And I find people who like to run, you've seen what runners look like. I mean, I'm talking about the big runners, the competitive runners. See, no one complains about them being unhealthy, right? But they're skin and bones just about. Why? Because when you're running a lot, it's hard to keep enough water in there because you're sweating, number one. But usually these guys are running, they are under stress. Because most of them don't know how to breathe. Most of them, unless they've been trained right, they don't know how to breathe. And so they run on adrenaline. Adrenaline, which takes place when the adrenals get kicked, when you're competitive. Some people are just competitive all the time. They're playing tennis, or doesn't matter what it is, they're competitive. Playing cards are competitive. Whatever. They just gotta win. They're gonna do their best to win. And see, you stay tight. You don't breathe good when you're competitive. You get tight. So sometimes you just interfere with the water distribution when you're that way. So that's why most athletes, unless they're big salt eaters, that they will stay trimmer or slimmer as far as their water content. But when I test them, everything's high. Salts are high, sugars are high, ureas are high. Everything's just high as can be. That blood's just like syrup trying to move through their system. But their weight looks great. See? That's manipulation of the weight. Using exercise, aerobics. You say, well, I can't lose weight unless I'm exercising. Well, all they're losing is water. See? It's a way to get rid of more water. But why do they have that weight? They shouldn't have that weight, extra weight, whether they exercise or not. If the body didn't feel like it needed that extra weight in order to store something that doesn't belong in the body. You see? So, whenever a person's overweight, it's the way the body's trying to store these obstructions so that they won't keep the blood polluted. Because the life of your flesh is in the blood, and if the blood can't carry that life to your cells, then you're weak, sick, and diseased. So to keep that from happening, it'll let you store that toxins, those obstructions, in your tissues. And it's safer out here, see, than to let those cells in your brain swell. Because it's not good for the computer to be sludged with water. You find that computers don't work good if they get too much water in them, right? So no cells in your bodies, but your hip cells could take a lot of extra water and you still function better than it being in your brain. Or your heart swelling. You wouldn't want your tissues in your heart to swell, right? And you surely wouldn't want your artery cells to swell, to store these bad guys. So the body does the best under the circumstances for us. If it can't get it out, the obstruction's out, then it's going to try to store it someplace, and that's a weight problem. It uses water to do it. Because it would be better to store these obstructions in water in your cells than to just put the obstructions in your cells with no water. Because it'd be more concentrated, wouldn't it? You take this high protein and put that in your cells, it would burn those cells up. That's arthritis, rheumatism, gout reactions. That's no fun. So it'd be better to dilute that acid when it stores it in your cells because it can't get it out through your kidneys. It would be better for it to do it that way. So that's the body trying to protect you when it does that, see? Now if you won't let the body do that, then it will push them into that protein, that uric acid in your cells. You have a gout reaction, you wish you'd never seen it. See? And that's what the body will do if it's forced to do it if you don't give it enough water to get it out of the body through your kidney and bladder system. Okay? So those are some of the parameters. Salt and protein are your main obstructions that cause weight problems. Too much of one or the other, or both. All right? And the cause of that is letting too much protein be in our diet, eating the protein at the wrong time, eating too late, having too much fat in your protein. Meat proteins will interfere with digestion, and so that would tend to cause your underweight problems. And too much salt in your diet, which also causes high blood pressure. So causes gas problems too, because salt is electrical, but salt also likes water. And it's like a sponge as it relates to water. So it causes weight problems also because it pulls water to wherever that salt gets stored when you get too much. Because again, you get too much salt in your blood, it'll cause those blood vessels to break, and that's a heart attack. If you have a leak in your artery or your vein. So to keep that salt from staying in your artery and vein and causing that breakage, it'll put it, again, someplace else that's safer to start with. But there is a limit to how much weight we can gain. The body can only stretch so far. I'm amazed at some of these 800 pounds. What's the record? What is the record? I guess that record is 100, 1,000 something. That is stretching. You know, that is really stretching. And your gallbladder can stretch 3 or 4 times the size, and then it pushes against your rib here, and that's what causes it to hurt up here sometimes for people. Because that gallbladder just gets so much fluid build up in there, see. So you can swell in your gallbladder. Kidneys can swell. Kidneys can get too tight. See, and that'll cause a weight problem. So too much protein in your kidneys, chocolate in your kidneys causes the kidneys to tighten up, and that will keep the blood from being able to get through it, and that'll cause some weight problems, also blood pressure problems. Too much salt in the kidneys will swell them, then the kidneys themselves won't be able to filter like they should if they're swollen, you know. So that's a blood pressure and a weight problem. Because the kidneys can't filter out the bad guys, what's the only alternative? Let's go store it. And the body says, well, if we got to store it, let's dilute it a little bit. So they put some sodium in there and dilute, so it pulls in water, so when they store it, it's at least diluted. Now when it can't do that, and it has to dump it someplace, then you're going to hurt. Because those cells are going to be more damaged, you know, than putting water in those cells. But there's still going to be a problem as far as your vitality, because there's going to be an obstruction either way that's going to interfere with the circulation of blood, which lowers your vitality, which then leads to all these different symptoms that people have that come from weight problems. Weight problem is a symptom itself, but weight problems can cause a lot of potential other problems that they got names for, like heart problems and you know, poor circulation and edema and poor, not able to breathe, and swelling, you can't get around, can't walk good, can't exercise anyway. So there's a lot of things, can't think, can't